Right. Looks like folks are loading in here. We'll start with some of the little bit of housekeeping, but welcome to our webinar today on how AI is reshaping inquiry and disagreement in higher ed. I'm joined here today by three excellent panelists, which I'm very excited to dive into this conversation. But before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping as everyone's getting situated here. The first is please do follow the HXA way in the chat. We encourage chat discussion. Do make sure that when you are sending chat messages that it's going to everyone. I think the default is usually to hosts and panelists. So if you want everyone, all the participants here to see it and be able to respond, please just make sure you're sending it to everyone. But do follow the HXA way. We also encourage questions for our panelists. So please do use the Q&A box specifically. That's where I'll be pulling questions from throughout the discussion. So if you have questions for any of our panelists or any general questions that you'd like asked on this topic, please do drop them in the Q&A box and you can upvote the ones that you also want, and we'll kind of be pulling from that throughout the event. So the more questions, the better. So we appreciate that. And then a few things that I'd like to point your attention to. If you are new to HXA, if this is your first event, please do subscribe to our newsletter. You will get all of the information for our upcoming events. We host several events every month, including panels like this, book discussions with authors, and also for members, if you work in higher ed or a graduate student, please do become a member. It is free, and join the 8,000 other faculty, staff, and graduate students that are advancing open inquiry on campus. And our members get access to member-only workshops as well. We also do have a Substack called Free the Inquiry, where our staff write about all sorts of relevant topics to open inquiry and viewpoint diversity in higher education. So please do sign up and stay in the loop. And if you are in the Pacific Northwest and or Vancouver area, please do join us for our regional conference next week. It's online as well, so you don't have to necessarily be in Vancouver to join, but we do have regional conference in Canada at Simon Fraser being live streamed and in person next week on the 27th. And if you're in the Mountain West region here in the US, next June, we're hosting another regional conference there next June. So you can save the date for that information as well. And our final reminder before we get to today's discussion is our wonderful publication Inquisitive has a new open call for pitches on our 7th issue on the theme of camp. So feel free to scan that QR code or go to inquisitivemag.org to learn more about our magazine and read our wonderful articles. And we look forward to hearing your pitches. All right. So finally to the topic at hand today, I'm joined here by Hollis Robbins, David Rozado, and Simon Cullen. I'll briefly introduce the three of them before we get started and dive into this discussion, which I'm really looking forward to today. Simon is a faculty research fellow here at Heterodox Academy Segal Center for Academic Pluralism, and he's a visiting research professor of artificial intelligence and civil discourse at UNC Chapel Hill School of Civic Life and Leadership. And he has developed the conversation AI software Sway, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about today, which is helping students have conversations about all sorts of topics. And if you have been around Heterodox Academy before, you've probably heard of this wonderful product as well. So we'll dive into more of that today. Hollis Robbins, is a professor of English and a special advisor for humanities and diplomacy, and she was formerly the dean of the College of Humanities. And she is a wonderful HXA member and writes a lot about AI in higher ed on her Substack, Anecdotal Value. So please go follow her. And we're looking forward to your contributions to the discussion today. And then we have David Rozado, who's an associate professor at I should have asked you how to pronounce this before, Otago Polytechnic in New Zealand. And he's a former faculty fellow also at Heterodox Academy Segal Center for Academic Pluralism in 2023. And he's done a lot of research on bias in these language models that underpin a lot of AI. And so he has a lot to say on these topics as well. So again, all three of you, thank you so much for joining today. I love the diversity of perspectives, and I hope that comes to bear in our conversation this afternoon. So to kick us off before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty and all sorts of topics, there's a lot of space in this, but just to give viewers kind of an understanding of where you're kind of positioned in this new AI era in higher education, I'd love to, start with David, kind of do a quick rapid fire, but what's your kind of take on AI in higher education, just to give viewers kind of a sense of where you're coming from on this topic before we dive in?
So on the one hand, I think it's obviously a wonderful tool to query the body of human knowledge. But at the same time, I think it's also important that we are vigilant about potential downsides. One of them could be that the companies that create these systems have very powerful incentives to maximize user engagement. And because these systems are created, among other things, with human feedback, in the same way that social media companies started to notice that they could maximize engagement basically by serving people what they wanted to hear or the most or the least charitable representation of the opposite side, and they noticed that that would increase engagement. There's the potential here for these systems to start to be overly pleasing and prioritizing validation, affirmation of users. And for students, for example, there could be, if they start to get very comfortable with this mode of interaction, there could be a decrease of students, professor interactions, students, TA interactions, students interactions. Like in the past, when these systems didn't exist, like people would just go to other fellow students or TAs to ask questions. And now they might be getting accustomed to just use the AI. And yeah, I think it would be important that we keep on the background this potential downside.
Yeah, thank you. Hollis, how about you? What's your big take on AI and where you're coming from?
Well, I think, first of all, I really appreciate this conversation, and I liked how David started us off with just some concerns. The way I look at artificial intelligence, it is a really new way to conceptualize a theory of knowledge, of what is known in the world, of what we can access. And when I speak about AI generally, I'm speaking about one of the pro models. I have Claude, the ChatGPT Pro, Google Gemini Pro, and I spend a lot of time looking at and working with what is it that it knows, what is it that it doesn't know. And I've written a little bit about the expertise that faculty members bring in the university setting, things that you know, that archives know, that are in the archives, that are in unpublished work, that are not available for querying with AI. So when I come to the question of what artificial intelligence might offer in the university setting, it's twofold. Number one, as I wrote about recently in Inside Higher Ed, it is a place where students can go and engage with just what is known in the world, or have the AI model deliver not just a paper for your class, but perhaps an engagement on a subject, whether it's, planets or gender or any of the hot button issues that people are doing, but also a way to ask questions about things that you might have gone to Wikipedia before, you might have gone to the Encyclopedia Britannica before, but you are interested in for your own reasons. And as David suggested, and I think this is important, at one point in time, a student and a faculty member, in the course of a class, the student would get close to 100% of the information from that class from the syllabus, from what the professor decided to put forward for the student. But in the AI paradigm, this time next year, students might get 10% of what they are going to be writing about or what have you from the professor, and 80% from an AI model. That's going to change the equation all the way around.
Oh, thank you. And Simon, what's your take on higher ed? Where are you coming from here? You're
Mm.
developing great tools for students using this technology. So how do you see AI in higher education right now?
Well, first of all, thank you for convening this discussion, and thanks to everyone coming out to talk about these really important topics. I also appreciate David starting off with something sort of a balanced picture. There are indeed really big risks here, and I wouldn't ever pretend otherwise. I do think, though, that one of the biggest risks is that we become so obsessed with the potential downsides of AI that we actually miss out on the tremendous promise that it has for education, not just in higher ed, but K through 12. I remember when I first was becoming acquainted with the really smart models, GPT-4 sort of stuff. I was very sad that I had not had this as a child. I was an extraordinarily annoying kid, constantly asking people questions. And like Hollis said, that it's a way to interact with the knowledge that humanity has produced, and in a way which is, of course, just endlessly patient, supportive, remembers everything you've ever told it. The other thing I think of a lot is what really the gold standard of learning is. The best evidenced method we have for improving people's skills in more or less any academic domain is one-on-one or small group Oxford, Cambridge style tutorials. And you know, the classic paper there is the two sigma problem by Bloom. And what he found there was that one-on-one tutoring, unlike any other method of teaching before or since, can produce improvements of something like 2 standard deviations. To put that into perspective, that's like taking someone who's thoroughly average and making them better than nearly everyone, 98% of the students in the class. Now, imagine if you took that and you didn't just give it to Oxbridge students, but you gave it to billions of students from their earliest years. What would that do to the world? How would that change the economies of developing nations? You know, it's going to be a massive and transformative tool. And I'm so glad, part of the reason I'm so glad to see everyone here is because I really want to encourage educators and not just tech bros to be involved at the ground level when we're building this new technology.
Well, can I jump in to say yes, and even, which is to say that the tutor has to be good, right? And, you know, the tutor has to be more than just what is generally known. Yes, there's feedback, and that's a great paper. Thank you for mentioning the Bloom, and I think we could if we could put it in the chat, that would be great. At a certain level, certainly at the level of high school and college, when what is important is not just feeling good about what you're learning, but cutting edge expertise. And, you know, I'm a Mars optimist. So I talk about planetary travel kind of as a shorthand to the kind of technological advances that we would need to be making and what our education system needs to be doing, such that we're not just sitting here arguing about gender. We're actually transmitting incredible knowledge at the frontiers of science and technology. What is it that we need to do so that at a certain point, the one-on-one, you know, the general knowledge that AI will know is not the specialized knowledge that's going to get us anywhere. So in thinking about, you know, the relationship of AI, certain intro level courses, tutorial, awesome. But at a certain point, we really need to think about frontier knowledge too.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. If you don't mind, I'll just respond now. So I think we've already surpassed the best human mediators and facilitators. So my teaching assistant, I've never found a teaching assistant who is as wise, as even-handed, as well-informed, as patient as the AI guide facilitator is on Sway. But I think we've also, we're seeing already pushing the boundaries of PhD level intelligence. Of course, this class of algorithms is proving astonishingly powerful and extraordinarily good at learning a kind of latent structure that appears all over reality in human language and computer language and the genetic code, all of this stuff. I really don't see any reason to think it's going to remain, you know, capped at the just helping undergraduates in their first year studies. To the contrary, actually, sorry, I'll just say one thing. The philosopher Ellen Hayek, a mutual friend of ours, had a really fabulous metaphysical chat about the counterfactual skepticism. Never mind what that is. And at the end of it, he said, it was scary good. It was at least as good as any colleague that he has ever talked to about counterfactual skepticism. So just a benchmark there.
Well, I actually want to hear what David has to say about this because sure, that's great, right? But what these chatbots do and what the conversation model is a certain kind of frictionless, not just sycophantic, but logical in a way that, you know, I'm sitting here with having the conversation. This is your scholarship, right? My scholarship is poetry. My scholarship is how to speak ambiguously over centuries, right? What is it that poetry does that large language models don't do? What does it mean to be ambiguous, to be elusive, to obfuscate for important reasons? What are other ways to communicate that aren't logical this and logical that and yes and refuting and evidence and all sorts of things? There's a kind of narrowness that I see in Sway, but also in the ways that AI talks, because it is a logical program. And again, love it, use it all the time, happy with it. But I also know that its mode of engagement is a very narrow set of what humans are capable of.
Yeah, David, I would love for you to jump in on kind of Hollis's point. There was you recently written for HXA about how the nature of chat GPTs, for example, their responses aren't actually authentically human in a way, and how that can impact how our expectations of conversations with real people like we're having now, and even, just how folks learn to agree and disagree and actually have a conversation. So what does your knowledge tell us about kind of that friction problem that Hollis was alluding to?
So I think a useful analogy about what these systems are, they are a compressed representation of this body of human knowledge. And because they are a compressed representation, they don't have enough memory to store the entirety of the internet. By definition, they have to eliminate certain things. And this has both pros and cons. On a way, they are very good at getting some sort of average of their training corpus out, recombining, etc. But so far, I'm not aware that they are able to generate new insights or to have original thinking or develop new mathematical theories on their own. So in that sense, they are limited. And they are also, it would be extremely unlikely that the body of viewpoints of humanity in 2025 is correct about everything. There's probably a lot of blind spots at this stage, a lot of things that are incorrect, and these systems are just absorbing that. There's in fact debate in the AI community that perhaps it would be beneficial if these systems would have less memory. They wouldn't just absorb all that knowledge, but instead they would just distill these cognitive circuits for rational thinking, processing information, and then just dynamically inject into the context window information if they need it, but that distill them to just these cognitive circuits. Because the fact that they are so good at memorizing could be detrimental in certain cases.
Yeah,
So
and go ahead, Simon.
If I can just jump in on there, I don't think that thinking about this line of the stochastic parrot, that they're just producing or reproducing some part of their training data, we're so far past that point now. I think anyone who uses these tools seriously in research or in engineering projects can see we're way beyond that. We are constantly creating totally new software, totally new ideas with the help of AI without any problem. And I just want to say, it's not a matter so much of memory. They don't remember things like a text file or like a hard disk. Actually, the way they remember things is much more like you and I do. It's associational, and by understanding the generative principles that actually produce the phenomena that we train them on. So the idea isn't that we actually just memorize all of the responses that were ever made, but rather that we have a learning algorithm that can sort of peer deeply into this huge corpus of data and understand the principles that generated those data. And those could be the principles that generate human thought, or if you're looking at something like Sora and video generation, they could be the principles of fluid dynamics and reflectance properties of objects. Somehow the world makes sense and is ordered according to principles which these machines can learn. That is their power. It's really quite distinct.
And I think yes, that's right. And yes, you are arguing for what it can do well. And I know this well. I've had early access to GPT-3 in 2020. I've been working with this in terms of poetry for 5 years now, right? And I also know what it can't do, right? It can't do illusion. It can't do genealogies of knowledge. It can only pretend to the way that it's embedded in its corpus, right? So it can't it can't understand gestures over time unless somebody has spelled it out for them. So hearing echoes for, it can say if somebody says to be or not to be, right? It can know enough from its data that somebody is alluding to Hamlet or Shakespeare or whatever. But the multiplicities of ways that we use language and we signify things is complicated. But I mean, again, I don't want to get into the details here, except to say that I agree with you, it can do many, many fantastic things, but it's a very small slice of how students communicate. And what we, speaking of, being in higher ed as a former dean, as a faculty member now, what is the value added of a university education in the age of AI? And for me, it's the transfer of knowledge. This tool can help that. Awesome. And it can teach to argue in a certain kind of way. Great, right? But we need to always keep in mind the knowledge that we have, the modalities of communication we have, that it doesn't have.
And jumping off of that, go ahead, David, and
if I can just briefly answer to Simon. So I don't want to come across as overly critical or negative on these systems. I think they are fantastic in many ways. But I think also at sometimes, I think a useful analogy is to think that we are sort of seeing like a magical trick that these systems are intelligent, when in reality it's just like heuristics that they use to appear intelligent. And there's also like obviously at a superficial level, it's not possible to see that trick. But if you start to probe those systems, systematically, you start to see hints of this trick everywhere. For example, like some experiments I have done and others have done have noticed like the massive effects of order in the prompt on the output of the system. So if you ask these systems, hey, is this syllogism correct or this one? Or which of these two resumes is more qualified for this job? Just being first or second in that prompt increases your chances of being selected by 80%. And that by definition is complete unprincipled reasoning. It's no intelligent, there's no intelligence there, it's just using heuristics. And so yeah, I think that caveat is important.
If I could just add one tiny thing on that. David, that sounds to me like a very familiar thing from cognitive science. You can affect the price people will pay for a toaster by asking them what the last few digits of their social are, because they anchor to the number that they've just heard. You can push them up, you can push them down. Heuristics and biases, of course, that phrase comes from the study of human cognition. So I really don't see that. I do want to also ask this question, because we often draw the distinction between a simulation of a thing and the rigid real McCoy. And that seems really natural. Anyone can generate 1 million examples when the National Ignition Laboratory runs a simulation of a thermonuclear explosion. You don't go board up your windows and worry about radiation poisoning, because it's just a simulation. But and that makes it very natural to think, oh, well, these machines are doing something that looks like intelligence, but is just a simulation of intelligence. But I actually think it's much, much less clear. So just to give you a simple thought experiment, imagine a world which contains 2 oracles. One of them is a disembodied spirit with real intelligence, real understanding, and it will, when you ask it questions, it will answer them like any good oracle will. The other is a mere simulation, but it's a perfect one. So it gives all of the exact same responses, the same strategic advice, the same conditional reasoning as the first oracle, but it's only a simulation. Huh? It's not real intelligence. So the point I'm trying to make is that the distinction between simulation and reality is much, much less clear when we're talking about a kind of thing that's best understood in functional terms, in terms of how it relates to other stuff.
And I think that's important. And I will say, just in terms of simulation, that I belong to this group that every Sunday night talks about on Twitter or X Spaces of what it would take to get to Mars, right? And because we don't have a lot of real world, almost investment in some of the things like what will happen with your kidneys, like can we 3D print in microgravity, all these things. Yes, simulations are where some of the best science, space science is going. Absolutely, right? So I'm with you on that. I guess my pushback is really the question of, again, always saying what it is not to romanticize AI as it can do everything and it's going to get better and better, but what can we always keep in mind that we humans bring to the table, and that the higher education, particularly, what's our value added in the era of AI.
And Hollis, that's actually a great segue to something that I kind of want to pull a thread on some things that each of you have kind of mentioned in different ways. There's in Hollis, you're hitting on it a little more directly of kind of the missing human experience of higher education. So we saw a lot of these challenges during the COVID era when everything went remote of students aren't interacting. And we know, as you mentioned earlier, Simon, that fundamental one-to-one interaction is crucial. And the best route of learning, obviously, not everything is one-on-one tutoring. We have lecture courses, discussion seminars, all these different formats. And I bring this up because the Chronicle of Higher Education recently ran a piece, I think it was this week, of just talking about how the study mode in Chat GPT and like students aren't talking to each other. Obviously, Simon, your tool directly addresses that and helps students talk to each other, but are either faculty and students spending so much time talking on the models and they're not actually getting the value out of just the raw reality of in-person conversations? And David, this is something, as I mentioned earlier, you've written about, of just these conversations aren't authentic to how people actually have a discussion and kind of the messiness that comes with human discussions. So it's a little bit of a two-prong, but I'm curious of your thoughts on this of, how does the just focus and time that students spend and faculty spend on AI impact the learning experience from the faculty and or student perspective, but also what does that say for the innovation and the new ideas that come from that, especially if these models are basically summarizing what information's already out there. So how is it affecting that learning experience, and specifically of helping students and faculty get to new places of innovation and scholarship? I know it's a big question, but I feel like we're kind of hitting on all these various pieces. So maybe Hollis, if you want to start out, because I know you've written about this issue like pretty directly in a lot of ways of how this is changing the experience.
Well, I think, look, the bottom line is online education is cheap for a university to platform, right? Online asynchronous education is is the way to get as most bang for your buck in terms of what you get, right? But we see some of the recent Stanford study about not getting jobs out of graduation. In-person education, one-on-one with, as Simon rightly said, right, the data is absolutely there. I am all for the model that I'd like to see is to see AI in some form delivering general education, delivering what is known. If it needs to be a 3-year degree, and again, I don't speak for my institution, this is what I'm seeing and saying, but to have that human interaction, nobody, no kid, no grown-up, no anybody who goes to college should know what their professor is an expert in. Okay, usually that's only asked as when you're a graduate student. You say, who am I studying with, and what is this person an expert in, right? That should be what every student asks, even at the undergraduate level. And if it can't be answered, then you should just go study with AI, right? Because what that layer of knowledge, experience, and specialized expertise that a faculty member who is the top of their field brings to that engagement is what you're paying for.
Simon or David?
A lot to think about there, for sure. So I guess, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is, well, sure, talking about the very best faculty members out there. There's dozens of them. That's not a lot. And so, we should really be realistic about what the relevant comparison set is here. And it's the average college instructor. So look, I just don't really buy this idea that they're somehow inherently limited to not being able to originate new ideas. This was the objection of Lady Lovelace to Alan Turing's computing machinery and intelligence, that a machine could never originate anything truly new. And Turing's response to it is actually one that I still find quite compelling. What makes you so confident that human beings can ever originate something truly new? I really don't see that. I don't see it in the classroom. I guess sometimes it happens in research with these occasional jumps, but why believe? I mean, I think we've already seen AI contribute in extraordinary, original ways, indeed, that have earned at least one Nobel Prize so far.
Good point. Fair point, David.
I mean, I'm not gonna go into a discussion about predicting the future. I don't know what will happen over the next few years, but I think there's no evidence at this stage that like these systems have created any new like insights in mathematics, in physics, new theories, etc. That might happen in the future, but we are not there yet. And yeah, as I said, I don't want to be over negative about these systems. They are wonderful in many ways, but I think there's also a lot of evidence of unprincipled reasoning on their part. I think the ultimate gold standard of truth resolution, for example, would be predicting the future, like being able to integrate a lot of information about the world and making accurate predictions about the future. And there's people who are actually testing this and measuring this and seeing like how good humans are at this and how good these systems are. And at this stage, humans are much better than these systems at integrating information about what's going to happen in the future, like making an estimate about what is the probability of a ceasefire in Ukraine within the next 12 months, etc. And these systems are not good at that. They can use a heuristic if you give them, for example, market predictions, what an aggregate of humans think is going to happen. They know that, oh, I just copy the market with like 0.99% correlation. And then they get close to human performance, not as good as human super forecasters, but close. But in the true measurement of how good these systems are at integrating information and making probabilistic predictions about the future, they are much, much worse than humans at this stage. And this is not a claim, this is measured. There's rankings of this ability of these systems to forecast.
Yeah. So in Hollis's, David, similar to what Hollis has mentioned, kind of that Hollis he phrases like that last mile problem is still where there's a lot of benefit to that direct human interaction, and where you think that higher ed should actually be focusing on is, we can't fight AI. Students are going to not use it. They're just going to stop using AI because we ask them not to. So in your view, that's really where we should be focusing
on.
And
I want to hear from Simon, but I just want to say that I mean, there are tens of thousands of experts. I'm not just talking about first year and second year instructors that, most faculty I've worked with are experts in something. It might just be some work by Chaucer or some, minor poet or something, whatever, but there is expertise. Every faculty member has expertise beyond what AI knows.
Yeah. So and Simon, I was going to pop it over to you.
If I could just go back to a few things David said. So first of all, the idea that these machines never originate anything new, that just seems unfounded, and I don't know what the evidence for it is, but I'll do an appeal to authority. Terry Tao, perhaps arguably the greatest mathematician alive, I believe he recently said that using GPT-5 in the advanced thinking mode, perhaps a mode that we regular people don't always have access to, was comparable to a strong graduate student in mathematics. That's not just any graduate student, that's one of Terry Tao's graduate students. That's pretty extraordinary. Okay, if that doesn't impress you enough, what about AlphaGo defeating Lee Sedol in an ancient game humans have been playing for thousands of years, and generating a move that was so dazzling when it was first made, people thought it was a mistake. Of course, Sedol retired from Go after the humiliation. Okay, if that doesn't impress you, how about solving the protein folding problem? A problem that scientists have been working on for decades. Many human lifetimes have been spent on it, and we had barely cracked away at it. Well, Demis Hassabis won the Nobel Prize for solving that problem effectively with AlphaFold, and we've just seen AlphaFold 3, which now gives us even more predictive ability over more complicated interactions fractions and more complicated folding problems. So I think there's just overwhelming evidence that these tools are profoundly creative. I also think you see that if you go and play with music generation or visual art and those kinds of things. But I won't take us down that path.
Yeah, Simon, and this is kind of a next point that I think would be useful to pivot to, and we're all using AI in some capacity. I think it's rare at this point to find someone who's like, I'm not using GPT or using more advanced aspects of it. So we're all using AI, and I don't think. I think one prediction we could probably make is that higher ed is going to have a component of AI. And Simon, it seems that your view, correct me if I'm wrong, is that like, let's make it work better for us than letting it just kind of overrun. And you've created Sway using AI to help students actually discuss. There's a few random questions in the chat asking about like what LLM Sway uses and if there's bias in that. So do you want to maybe touch on how you think we can use these in a beneficial way, which you've kind of been hitting at in a lot of ways, but also a little bit about Sway and how that's working?
Yeah, thank you. I'd be delighted to. So, one thing I really want to impress on people is that AI is not just a productivity tool, and we need to stop thinking of it in terms of a productivity tool. It is intelligence effectively for free, effectively on tap anywhere on the planet. And that is an extraordinarily powerful thing. Of course, intelligence is the most powerful transformative force that we know of in the universe. So you should really think broadly, because there are pretty straight lines from the technology that we already have today to applications that are going to dramatically change the world, possibly for the better, perhaps for the worst. And we should all be trying to be involved in a positive and constructive way to bring about the former rather than the latter. So that's what my colleague Nick DeBella and I have been doing as we've been developing Sway. Sway, just to give everyone a brief intro, if you don't know, is a student chat platform. It connects students. It's kind of like iMessage or a WhatsApp with one proviso. You can only talk to people you disagree with. So we elicit everyone's opinions. We maximize viewpoint diversity, both within groups and across a large class. And then we dump the students into a chat room who disagree, and we try to provide scaffolding to help them have a truly deep, informed, rational conversation. And so that's where we see the AI not functioning in the role of a productivity tool, but rather as a wise, unbiased discussion facilitator, which it seems to me a manifestly good thing if we could have that happen at scale. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to normalize constructive disagreement on American campuses and indeed around the world by giving students hands-on practice with the HXA way. As a matter of fact, we've tried to build HXA values into Sway from the very ground up. So this is a system which is developing people's ability to express themselves constructively, to leave out the needless invective, the passive-aggressive eye roll emojis, and to help them recognize the implicit assumptions in their arguments, which are often where the problems are hiding, to make sure people aren't talking past each other and sailing by like ships in the night. All of these functions that an excellent mediator or a really demanding college professor can perform, we can do, except we can do it at a scale and sort of one-on-one, for pennies. So I also just wanted to say one last thing about the sycophancy and the problem with these robots being obsequious. It's a problem, indeed, but it's one that's very easy to overcome. And actually, I believe anyone here who's using ChatGPT, go set your custom instructions, tell it you hate to be flattered. It will change its behavior. But I just want to say for the AI guide, it is anything but obsequious. It is truly demanding. Students occasionally describe it as sassy. And I will say, I consider myself a very demanding and professor who's relatively comfortable, actually probably unusually comfortable confronting students. But if a student says something problematic, I'll say try and correct them once, and then maybe they'll say it again, or they might try a second time. But if there are people around, that's it. I'm done. AI doesn't have any compunctions like that. It will hound you. It will not stop until you answer that question. So and we see this in the transcripts all the time, and I really encourage people to go check out our website.
Yeah, Hollis, I know we talked about this.
Yeah, no, it horrifies me. That everything that you just said horrifies me in every way. First of all, it's none of your business what I think. whether I'm your student or not. It is none of your business what I think. I don't have to tell you. I can lie. I would lie because if I were a student, I wouldn't be at university for anybody to get inside of my head, right? That the zone of privacy I consider really, really important. So I might lie, I might pretend, I might do some things, but this idea that your institution can and should have access to your point of view for some sort of weird idealistic reason, romantic reason that we should all be great communicators, I just don't think is the point of higher ed at all. And I like one of the things in the chat that said that, eye rolls are sometimes pretty good. And I put in the chat, my favorite Star Trek Next Generation episode, season 5, episode 2, Darmok, right, where there's a planet full of people that speak in metaphors, right? They speak in very non-logical, non-straightforward ways. And it's really a brilliant, brilliant episode, as all Star Trek is, about how we ought not to privilege a certain kind of logical argumentation format that you and Sway are doing, because it actually cuts out a whole segment of the population who does not want to communicate that way.
Hollis, I want to, I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to say that I think it's also problematic to be overly optimistic with this technology. Again, who knows what will happen next year or in 10 years. And overall, I think I'm long on this technology. I think these systems, there's a lot of reasons to believe that they will just keep getting better. But I think it's also important to realize that a lot of the impressive performance that we see with these systems, they are basically cheating because they have basically absorbed all those tests from mathematics, from all the tests where people measure intelligence. They have basically memorized that. There has been a percolation of the evaluation data that should not happen into the training data. So the performance we get is overly optimistic. I'm not claiming, these systems are amazing and number crunching, etc. But they are, like chess, Go. They're a type of intelligence, but it doesn't encompass all of the things that humans can do. And what a remarkable coincidence if these systems are so intelligent that precisely the one test where they cannot cheat, which is probabilistic estimations about the future, because the data just is not there, they cannot have it in their training parameters, that's where they fail. If you give them access to a search engine so they can consume articles from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, anything, and you ask them, what is a certain question about the future, they fail. The only way they can approximate human performance is if they use a heuristics. You give them directly, hey, this is what the market predicts that's going to happen, and then they just copy that, 0.99 correlation. So what a remarkable coincidence that precisely that one test where they cannot cheat, there's no way that the future can percolate into the training data, they struggle. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. But again, I'm optimistic on the long term, but I think it's also important to not be overly optimistic at this stage yet and to be a bit skeptical.
So if I could just respond to the question about the benchmarking and training. So my colleague Nick and I actually worked on an OpenAI AI training program where we were part of a team writing PhD level problems, original problems that very bright PhD students would struggle with. But where we could get, the true experts, perhaps there's only 5 or 6 of them in the world, they would clearly coalesce on a distinct answer and would provide a pretty uniform justification for why it's correct. So we were being paid to write totally new content and then, of course, testing whether or not it could be broken by the AIs. These sorts of tests, Humanities Last Exam, these sorts of benchmarks do include novel problems. And the ability to solve those problems simply cannot be explained by their existing in the training data. They were created specifically for that purpose. I want to say also about prediction, and you seem to be really enthusiastic, David, about human prediction, but pretty well-known, one of our well-known Heterodox Academy members, Philip Tetlock, has studied prediction for a very long time. Of course, he's most well known for his popular book, Super Forecasters. He has a wonderful scholarly book on the same topic, where we find that regular human beings are actually abysmal, shockingly bad. I mean, like chimps throwing at a dartboard. So I don't know where the enthusiasm for human prediction comes from. You might be thinking of the super forecasters. And what they have going for them is a really deep, fascinating, and important question. But I don't think it bears obviously on whether or not these machines are intelligent or have understanding or anything like that. Hollis, I have to go back just to the point you said about the institution having no right to know what's in your head. In a certain sense, of course, I do agree. What I was thinking when you were saying that was, well, Hollis, do you oppose regular classroom discussions? Because, of course, that involves students exposing their views, at least
Oh,
sometimes.
it does not. If I tell them what they think about a poem, or if I say where I think this line came from, or what kind of work something is doing, I never ask students their own views, ever.
I mean, every single question you just articulated, I would only be
No,
able to answer by telling you
absolutely
what I
not.
think about it.
Yeah, no, there's a very big difference between asking them what kind of work this gerund does in this line of poetry, or what kind of work, did this particular law do, or what was the effect downstream, is not what's in their head. It's their analytical ability, and that's a very big difference.
So I get the sense that maybe your objection is because we're asking about their views on polarized
Yes, I do. It's none of
issues.
anybody's
Yeah.
business.
So
And the fact that we're making it people's
Yeah.
business on campus, I find
Yeah.
abhorrent.
And if you just let me finish, I think there's a real answer to that question. So part of the reason why we built Sway was precisely to try and solve the crisis of self-censorship that has been an absolute disaster for higher education in this country, by giving students a private space where they can share their thoughts, try on ideas for size, object to each other, and not worry that a misplaced comment or disagreeing with their professors might tank their grades or, God forbid, cost them a job in the future. So we really go to tremendous extents to preserve student privacy to the degree of not even allowing their professors to read the raw transcripts. What we do to provide the professors, we believe it's very important to give them insight into not only what the students think, the distributions of their opinions, but also why they believe it, what arguments move them, what objections stop them in their tracks, and correlatively, which fall flat. That seems to me deeply important information for any educator.
Yeah. Okay. I don't agree. I mean, I just don't think, I actually do not think that that is the point of the institution at all. And I understand you're marshaling evidence everywhere. I think you can go ask Claude, you could go ask your chat GPT. You don't need to be paired up with somebody that the expectation is you're paired up because you disagree, and then you're put in this cage to do this. I find it abhorrent. Now, great. Well, I understand that I'm in the minority view here, right? But I do think that there's a way you can do this on your own. And I'm agreeing with you. My piece in Inside Higher Ed is exactly on the fact that students can do that in the privacy of their own dorm room. They can ask whatever question they want without the institution asking them what they think.
If I can briefly interject,
Yep.
Simon, the ranking I was referring to was precisely created by Philip Tetlock with his Forecasting Research Institute, and it shows that human super forecasters are better at this stage than these systems. Again, they are predicting that next year they might be as good as human forecasters, but again, using this cheating system of just copy-pasting market predictions. The true measurement is ability to synthesize lots of information through a search engine, inject that into the context window, then make a prediction. They are very far away from humans at this stage. I cannot predict what will happen in 2 years' time or not, but it's just, to me, it's a remarkable coincidence. Precisely the one test that they cannot cheat, they struggle.
If I can, as we're kind of coming into the last 10 minutes here, I would love to kind of shift a little gear and just kind of get audience question in here. So one of the things that I think David and Simon, you two have had somewhat different views on, are kind of the reality and like the ability of AI to think. And a lot of this comes down to like whether AI is thinking in the same way as humans or can or cannot achieve the same kind of reasoning or logic that humans use. My question, and similar to this audience question, is if there's anything AI could ever do that would make you believe it's not just a simulation. Does it matter that it does or does not think in the same way as humans? If in a way, isn't it a benefit if it thinks in a different way, or obviously it still has utility even if it's different. So I'm curious, and I'm thinking of this from a developmental perspective. Obviously, it's still humans, but small kids and adults problem solve in very different ways, and that's actually useful for the kids because they're more open to how to approach different problems than humans or than adult humans are. So I'm thinking about it in a similar way. Like, is that actually potentially beneficial for inquiry if our AI systems do think differently than we do? I'm just kind of curious what you think about that.
So I think there's no doubt that they are quite different to us in some interesting and important ways. So I was trained as a cognitive scientist in computational neuroscience, where I did my postdoc. And there I was inducted into what is, or was at least until very recently, perhaps, the major sort of dogma of the field of computational cognitive science, which was that we would build computer models such that when they were exposed to a range of inputs, would generate outputs like those that humans would generate, conditional on being exposed to those same inputs. So in other words, we would build a computational mechanism that reproduced important aspects of human behavior or language or cognition. And to the extent that we could match the outputs of the human, we would think we had gained some insight into the underlying mechanism of cognition. It still strikes me as a promising methodology, if nothing else. But it's really notable that shortly, not that long ago, we passed the Turing test and the world just shrugged. It didn't seem to care. And people say, we've learned so little about human cognition because they're so unlike us. I would push back on that. I think they are in some ways frighteningly like us. We can replicate a lot of biases and heuristics and fascinating results with LLMs that turn up in humans, and there's a deep philosophical question about why that is. But I'll also agree with the premise of the question. They are obviously different to us. They're a different kind of intelligence, and that does make for a certain kind of really generative interaction. Just things that I would never have thought of that I can get prompted to consider. David, I'll pass it off, or Hollis, I'll pass it off to you.
Oh, I mean, you've been very clear about what you think, so I'm just listening. Like, I have not said what I have thought about this. I've said what I've thought about your policy, but not, in fact, I mean, I use the thing all the time. I think it's fantastic. I think it's wonderful. I think there's a certain way. Again, my views, if they differ than yours, are my views on what higher education is, which is about the transfer of knowledge from expert to student, and then how AI can do that sort of general education layer easier and swifter. But I'm not sure that you think that my embrace of privacy in terms of the privacy of individual autonomy and my ability to sort of be left well enough alone while I'm in higher ed is valid. But I want to hear from David.
David?
I think that was a great question, Nicole. These are amazing tools. Perhaps it's even good that they are not like human intelligence. And to me, like one of the most remarkable things is like how fast they have improved. If you look at the last 10 years, where these systems were 10 years ago, where they are now, if you extrapolate, if that continues, and that's, I mean, who knows? But if that continues, this technology is going to be scary good in 10 years time. And of course, it's going to have all sorts of like implications for productivity, creativity, etc.
So
Yep.
if I may,
Go ahead.
Hollis, I think you have isolated perhaps the root of our disagreement, and it must be something about the purpose of higher education. I'd like to say specifically undergraduate education. Graduate education seems to be importantly different. Look, if the point of higher education is to transmit knowledge to students, then we've been failing miserably for a very, very long time. And not so the basic principle of human memory, and most students don't know this, but the way you make something stick in your brain is by recalling it periodically. Recall exercises are how the basic principle of human memory is use it or lose it. Now, everyone knows students are rather fond of this technique they call cramming. It's where they try and memorize as much shit as they can, dump it all onto an exam and never think of it again. And it has the predictable, measurable, and replicable result that they remember next to nothing. That is the sad reality. So only students a year later, if you haven't used your skills, who are actually going to pass the exam, even pass, scratch by, are the ones who got A's. Everyone else will flunk. And that is, so if that's the purpose of higher ed, we have been failing miserably forever, I suspect. But I have a different vision.
Well, you've just given your vision, which I can't even process it because I disagree with it so profoundly, but you want to explain to me. And you want me to hear your explanation. And again, this is the very model that I find narrow, right? Because throwing a bunch of evidence at me is actually not going to change my mind.
Well, I think the purpose of higher education can be another rich panel discussion for sure. And it's a question that at Heterodox Academy we talk about all the time. So I appreciate the viewpoint diversity on that as well. There's always a good discussion to be had in that area. But we're coming up to the last few minutes, and I know I had some messages. Folks want to know where they can contact you. I know all of you are online in some various capacity. So Hollis, we can start with you. Where can people find you? What's your Substack? Where can they find your views on higher ed, and how can they get in touch?
Yeah, no, on Anecdotal Value on Substack, if you have the link there, that would be great, because I mean I write on all sorts of things, on how to tell when something's AI written. The idea that the last big thing I had written is on the 2-minute mile problem, which is what happens when we all learn at different speeds, and what happens to the Carnegie unit, and what happens to the very structure of higher education when somebody might want to start college at 13, for example, and other people might want to take 8 years to graduate. It's all good, but how do we actually think about a structure that is less of a cage? So that would be great. I look forward.
Yeah. Thanks. And Marisa dropped your Substack link in the chat there. And David, you're next on my screen. Where can folks find you, read about what you're talking about, and follow up?
Yeah, I just dropped my Substack on the chat. So Rosado's Visual Analytics.
Awesome. Thanks, David. And Simon, where can everyone find you? And obviously, Sway, is there anywhere else online that they can find you as well?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. Love to see you there. But I've just dropped 2 links in the chat that I think is the best place to start if you want to see what actual students who have used Sway in their real classes have to say about the experience, how it compares to other classrooms. And I think my deepest hope is that will really inspire some creative thinking about the promises of this technology and what we might be able to do with it. So that's what I encourage you to do. Go check out our website. Don't worry about me so much.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Hollis, David, Simon, thanks for the discussion. Loved the debate as well. So we'll get you back together maybe another time to dive into the purpose of the university as well. So thanks, everyone. Please subscribe, and we'll see you at our next event. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I enjoyed it too. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it. It's always good to have productive disagreement.
Absolutely.
Of course. Thanks, everyone.